Why will chaos never win? Let's start with a little preface. In many American cities, and indeed in most major cities worldwide, there is an ongoing war between two large armies. This war takes place daily, with battles unfolding in various urban environments, from park benches and small basements to luxurious villas and skyscrapers. One side of the conflict has an army of incredibly professional soldiers, educated, intelligent and capable fighters who are significantly better prepared than their opponents from the Second Army. This is because the First Army has more extensive resources, reliable supply routes, and most importantly, it has a much higher level of command than its enemies. However, this army also has two fatal flaws. The first flaw is that very command which can bind the army due to its successful yet cumbersome bureaucracy. This army is both the master and the slave of its command. The second problem of this army, which is often the most detrimental, is that career advancement within it is not always related to combat and tactical skills, which one would think are necessary for any soldier, and especially for a commander. Instead, politics play a much larger role in this army. A soldier's ability to play social games with those who hold true power is more important, which inevitably leads to the situation where positions of command are occupied not by competent warriors, as it should be, but by skillful politicians. Thus it turns out that our First Army, which seems more powerful, is hamstrung by the corruption among its leadership. An effective army of soldiers with extremely unreliable command. This army could always win if not for all this bureaucracy. The Second Army is the complete opposite of the first. It does not have the opportunity to recruit trained fighters. Instead, it uses what it has, enlisting less educated, less trained and less disciplined soldiers, who can sometimes be more dangerous to each other than to the enemy. These soldiers can safely be used as cannon fodder, but it is difficult to get more out of them. The Second Army compensates for its shortcomings compared to the first by its numbers and enthusiasm. In the Second Army, leadership is much more effective, primarily due to its Darwinian nature, where the strong devour the weak and the most strong, savvy and cunning always stand at the top. Because otherwise, if you can't, others will do it for you. Therefore, in battle, this army is extremely effective, and thanks to its mighty leaders, can fight on par with its opponent, despite the poor quality of its soldiers. As many of you have already understood, we are talking about the police and criminals, respectively. And their constant war is an excellent example to explain the nature of the war between the Imperium and Chaos. So why does Abaddon have no hands? Why has he failed more than a good share of his Black Crusades, and why is his bolter worse than Horus's weapon in the 31st millennium, despite being the same weapon? Chaos is one of the most iconic and popular armies in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. People know and love Chaos. That's why it spawns entire legions of fans around the world. People get so lost in this richness of the universe, in their own ideas about chaos, that sometimes they ignore the simplest truths about what chaos means and how it functions. Here's the gist. There are people who love chaos for reasons different from most other fans of this army. Now we will try to explain why they love chaos so much and think it is cool. The main thing is not to forget that all those things that make it so cool also equally limit it. These things hinder it, and therefore chaos will never be able to win. And now we are not talking about the tabletop game, but rather posing the question. Damn it, Abaddon, you've tried 13 times and you still haven't succeeded. What the hell? Now let's go through the points. The most important fact about Chaos armies is they are not armies at all. Don't think of Chaos forces as an analogue of the Imperium's forces. Here, it is worth looking at the situation as a typical case of asymmetric warfare. This is when two unequal forces fight each other, a war between opponents whose military forces are significantly imbalanced. This is called asymmetric warfare. So why doesn't Chaos always win? After all, they have their own space marines and countless hordes of cultists and legions of demons. Why haven't they wiped the Imperium throughout the galaxy? At first glance, these armies seem quite similar. Chaos has war bands, loyalists have chapters. On one side we have fanatics, on the other, chaplains. Champions versus sergeants, hellbrutes versus dreadnoughts. You would say the armies are the same, really? In short, no. They are entirely different. And it's not that chaos is evil. Their difference lies in something far more important. Perhaps the most important thing: resources. And even in the 41st millennium, money decides. Money is just a way of exchanging resources. Money itself is worth nothing. We just decide among ourselves that money is some equivalent of other resources. Just like we all understand by the word tree, the plants that live thanks to photosynthesis. The term money is very useful even if you don't use it directly. It would be quite hard for all of us to imagine a corn berserker reaching under his armor for a wallet, but resources are needed by everyone. Even a corn berserker needs to refuel his chain axe. A bolter needs to be loaded with something. And all Chaos Space Marines, except for the 1,000 Suns, need something to eat. So, even if you do not use money, you won't be able to wage war without provisions. Of course, you can take ammunition from the corpses of defeated loyalists. But how can you do this if you initially have an unrefueled chainsword, and the reactor of your power armor has long since run out? Good luck fighting loyalists armed with gleaming bolt guns whose barrels are not clogged with demonic filth. I hope the idea is clear now. Sorry, our dear Chaos followers, but if you don't believe us, read the RPG rulebook from Fantasy Flight Games called Black Crusade, and compare what a Chaos follower initially receives in the game to a fighter from another FFG RPG called Deathwatch, and just compare their equipment. Why does a Chaos Havoc start the game with only a heavy stubber? Because the ammunition is cheaper. Why do cultists use autoguns instead of laser guns? For the same reason. Is this so bad from the law's perspective? It all depends on how useless you consider hobos. Personally, we believe that this hoboness is an important part of Chaos's appeal. You are not an army, you are a warband. And a warband is a group of brothers who serve one deity or even themselves. And they boldly try to destroy the regime of the Imperium. Does this mean Chaos has no money at all? Certainly not. Chaos does not pay for the gold that covers the trims of the Terminator armor of the Black Legion, for example. That gold is paid for by the aforementioned champions, our superwise leaders mentioned in the first example at the very beginning. After the battle, they take all the loot for themselves, which is why champions always have better gear than regular Chaos followers. Once you stop seeing Chaos as the same Imperium, only more evil, and start thinking of them as a group of religious fanatics, the comparison will become even clearer to you. A Chaos Lord is not like Marneus Calgar, only with horns. However, there is a place in the lore for such a guy, surely among the Iron Warriors. No, a Chaos Lord is a deranged psycho who rose through the ranks thanks to his own charisma, daring, skills, and of course violence. Now let's try to understand and answer the question, why is Abaddon's bolter in the 41st millennium worse than the same bolter of Horus in the 31st millennium? You can probably imagine a typical world of death, horror, depravity, fear, a prime example of the conditions in which the followers of Chaos have to maintain their weapons. Agreed, the most ideal place for complex electromechanical manipulation, calibration, and repair. Purity, order, and no distractions. Even if we do not take into account the perverting and destructive nature of the warp, which we must say would be quite a significant oversight. Note that 10,000 years have passed, yet Horus's bolter was originally a bespoke, custom-made weapon. Who then can repair a broken bolter for a Chaos Space Marine? Of course, only the Dark Mechanicus. Yes, well, good luck collaborating with these friendly smiths. The dialogue would go something like this. Why are you here, Chaos Lord? I need 47,392 bolter rounds. How much will that cost? Calculating done. We will require 300 of your Adeptus Astartes as parts for servitors. Oh, okay. And how much will it cost to repair my awesome Talon of Horus? Calculating done. We will need the tears of a greater star angel mixed with silver elixir and the blood of 1,000 owners. I did not expect that. In other words, the Dark Mechanicus owe nothing to the Chaos Legions. They are not beholden to them at all, in any way, and you simply can't just push them around. Remember how in the Horus Heresy, Book 3, one of the Mechanicus characters had all the flesh stripped from his bones, and his iron endoskeleton killed his tormentor, and after that made himself a new body the size of a house from the stitched-together corpses of servitors. Then he just went on to build Chaos Titans. So, well, this is a Chaos Titan. Do you think he's afraid of a Chaos Lord? Especially if it's a Lord Commander with ridiculous wings on his helmet? Imperial technologies certainly have undergone stagnation and ritualization over 10,000 years. But as it turns out, in a state where everyone isn't trying to kill their neighbor, production is somehow better. Chaos has no such work culture, so their technologies have fallen even lower. Even the mighty talon of Horus has dulled after 10,000 years of constant war. And even Bolter today is more of a symbolic artifact than a weapon. Essentially, most of Chaos's equipment is rusted, falling apart before your eyes, or simply obsolete. And we are only talking about weapons that aren't possessed by demons and don't try to kill and devour you or do something worse. Someone complained that Typhus's scythe has suddenly lost power since the Horus heresy. We suspect this is somehow connected with the fact that the weapon's owner, Herald of Nurgle, the god of decay, lives in conditions far from ideal for maintaining such a complex electronic device as a power scythe. Essentially, most of Nurgle's soldiers hold together by ancient rust, dried filth, or duct tape. It's a wonder this scythe can even do anything, rather than bending like tinfoil after its first strike on any hard object. Look, here he is, the warrior who exemplifies how one should care for and maintain their weapons and armor. Another issue with Chaos is that the Warp is an incredibly hostile environment for normal life, even disregarding the demons constantly attempting to kill you. In the Warp, everything starts to fall apart, and the only workshop that can fix it all, as we previously described, exists in the bodies of tech-bonded servitor corpses. This brings us to the final and most unpleasant drawback of Chaos: madness. The most important thing to know about mental disorders is that they make your life significantly more difficult. There is nothing enchanting about mental disorders. They provide no advantages. They simply make life harder. Traitor Astartes and Chaos Space Marines are often described as psychotic, which they likely are. However, a warrior's mind, filled with a broad spectrum of disorders from combat post-traumatic stress disorder to schizophrenia, hardly makes him a more effective soldier. Yes, perhaps his disorders help him kill without remorse or significant emotional turmoil. But what about the constant urge to kill? Such a need will always hinder effective strategy and tactics. We haven't even started talking about the utter psychopaths who collect skulls for the throne of their god. These maniacs just want to get into the thick of battle as quickly as possible, so you'll have to factor that into your tactics. Madness is not a superpower. At best, it's a source of irritation. At worst, it's simply an inability to think logically. The Chaos Army operates on madness. Remember our description of armies led by cunning leaders but fighting with useless soldiers? Well, Chaos wins not because it has so much infantry, it wins despite it. Chaos triumphs because its leaders are so ruthless and never think about who stands in their path to victory. Ascending to a demon prince is the apotheosis of a Chaos worshipper's success in Warhammer 40k. It is the reward for a life lived in the grip of delusions of grandeur and self-love. For a Chaos Lord who achieves this apotheosis, success or self-doubt is utterly irrelevant. They care not for those who perish in their name. Chaos is self-assuredness and self-love. It is the path to the ultimate version of only oneself, for which literally everyone around you has to be sacrificed. This is the weakness of Chaos. Psychopaths make poor team players. They make foolish decisions because mental disorders make them rather poor thinkers. They poorly control their emotional impulses and urges, which in turn harms their relationships with others, which is the worst part. They don't even realize it. They don't understand the value of friendship as a force with real, tangible benefits. A psychopath is always alone, and a loner will never be as mighty as a group. This is especially evident in the Warhammer 40k. If Horus could not destroy the Imperium when he had 8 fully equipped legions of Astartes, 8 Primarchs, a colossal array of top-notch devices from the dark age of technology, and the advantage of a surprise attack, so what chance do today's average Chaos Lords have? Yes, they can wreak havoc, drench entire planets in blood, make women and children cry. only until the moment when a trusted lieutenant of such an average lord plunges a knife into him and sacrifices him to Tzeentch. Chaos isn't called the ruinous powers for nothing. So why is Chaos's greatest strength also its greatest weakness? Chaos wins because it is so harsh and brutal, because the nature of any warband subscribes to the rule of natural selection. The weak die, the strong thrive, and the strongest receive phenomenal powers that no mere mortal could ever grasp. But for these powers, one has to pay with everything one has. Chaos exalts individuals at the expense of the collective. Chaos is as strong as its mightiest link. The Imperium, however, can simply assemble an organized force and destroy that link, which means defeat for Chaos. When Abaddon is gone, what remains? A bunch of Chaos space marines with outdated bolters, a handful of champions who immediately start fighting each other to see who will be the new boss, and a horde of unwashed and terrified cultists who by that time will already be getting slaughtered to open a portal back into the Eye of Terror. That's why Chaos is its own worst enemy, because it constantly puts spokes in its own wheels. Even if funds are sufficient for ammunition, even when maniacs are successfully directed where their commander wants them, even when old gear is miraculously repaired, Chaos will always lose. An army where everyone strives for their own goal isn't an army at all. It's a pack of cats. And have you ever tried to get a pack of cats to dance to your tune? Here was our version of why Chaos will never win, and why Abaddon has no arms. Do the Chaos gods even want victory as such? After all, it's boring to destroy strong enemies once, to then get minor pleasure from the suffering of weaklings. Maybe they deliberately don't destroy the Imperium completely, not even giving the Black Crusades all the help the Chaos gods can give. It doesn't matter whether the Chaos warriors win or lose, there is still blood flowing, horror and pain multiplying, which amuses and pleases the dark gods.